Hello, and welcome to the WillowKids podcast, a space where curiosity is nurtured, creativity is encouraged, and learning is treated as a lifelong venture. At WillowKids, we believe children thrive when education goes beyond memorization, when it invites wonder, builds confidence, and honors each child's unique rhythm of growth. In this podcast, we explore how kids learn best, hear from inspiring educators and parents, and share ideas that support thoughtful, joyful learning in academics, the arts, and life. Whether you are a parent, an educator, or lifelong learner, we are glad that you're here. Let's grow strong minds and kind hearts together. Our guest today has 16 years of experience in child development and guided play, a master's degree in organizational leadership and change from Pacific Oaks College. We have Danyel Kilgore with us today. It's so good to have you.
Thank you so much, Kayla. I'm happy to be here. And thank you to WillowKids for having me once again.
We're super excited to get into this topic because I love play, anything play. But before we get into that, we are excited to share that WillowKids is officially launching its tutoring pilot program in Calabasas, California. This pilot is designed for families who want something a little more thoughtful and personalized than traditional tutoring. An approach that supports academic growth while nurturing curiosity, confidence, and genuine love of learning. If you are a parent in or around Calabasas and interested in learning more, we invite you to visit www.willow.kids to explore the program, see what we're building, and sign up for updates. Spots for the pilot program are limited, but we are excited to grow this community together from the ground up. Visit www.willow.kids, and thank you for being a part of the WillowKids journey. So today's podcast is going to be about guided play versus direct instruction, and also talking about free play versus guided play as well. So before we get into all of that, I do have some insights because it's so hard to learn because for children specifically, because they are, learning things for the first time. And it feels hard, not because children lack the ability, but because they're either over-directed or left without enough guidance. So children understand more deeply when they are active and engaged in patterns of learning, engaged in the process of learning rather than the passive listeners or the aimless explorers. And guided play creates the balance of structure and exploration that helps understanding stick, builds confidence, and reduces frustration over time. So can you tell me, what do you think the early signs that a child is feeling that pressure to stay engaged, but is really struggling to stay engaged?
I think it's, as early as the preschool years. And I think, at that age, especially, children are very honest and they're going to let you know, maybe not necessarily verbally, but with behaviors, that it is something they are not ready for. It is something that they are not comfortable with. And you'll see that you won't be successful in kind of relaying the information that you would like them to relay. A part of it is literally that the brain is developing, and it develops in stages and phases. And that's why we have these developmental ages and stages that we, study and come to know very well, because you really can't introduce anything before a child before a child is ready for it, because they literally don't have either the synapses that are connected yet, or even the development of muscles and skills for gripping, for writing. A lot of times I think that's a push too early on is, we had writing and writing their names, because in kindergarten they had to write and know these. And I know reading and writing is kind of especially, and early math skills, where we're seeing more of a push, where there has been kind of a slight trend of parents wanting that to start earlier and earlier.
Mhm.
And I think that you see in the preschool classroom, and as young as 3 and 4 years old, you will start to see frustration because they aren't ready for it and it's not appropriate. And then you're going to have the opposite effect, right? You are doing exactly what you don't want to do. And then they're going to have an aversion for learning. And they're already from a young age going to decide that they don't like math. They don't like numbers. They don't like work or learning or school, because it was not introduced to them in a way that was appropriate for them, nor at a time that they were ready for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also the social aspect is, I think some parents are kind of blindsided in a way when they come with the realization that maybe their child is also paying attention to other kids in their class, and they didn't really have that to kind of go off of. And that also creates, that confidence is so important at that age. And if they're not able to do things in their mind as well as their peers, and that creates a lot of frustration for them. So
That is
absolutely.
That is exactly right. And and that is there are a lot of, benefits obviously to the social development and interaction. That's why we have, but there are also are some impacts that that kind of hurt a little bit because suddenly there is a comparison. Suddenly there starts to be a recognition of, oh, something is harder for me and maybe not so hard for this person. And why can't I do this? And why am I not able to do it like them? And you're right, that confidence from that young age, which starts off so high, as they get older and in school and as they become more aware of that, then you're right, then it starts to impact and that self-confidence starts to go and diminish. And then once that diminishes, it becomes even harder. You have another challenge then in trying to teach and impart that learning, because if that confidence is not there, then that's a big obstacle that you have that you're trying to overcome.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's something, oh my gosh, I mean, I think you probably have so many stories, and I have so many stories of kids I can think of that are just, they that have that same issue. So yeah, that's I so 100% agree. In everyday learning environments, where do we tend to lean too far forward and too far back?
I think an important thing that it mentions too in the article that I know we read in terms of preparation for this and kind of the focus of this, it talks about that, you also have to, for each child is different, each personality is different, they learn differently. And so there is a lot of getting to know that and adjust methods. And some methods for some children are going to be extremely successful. And then for other children are not going to be. And you're going to have to entirely revamp how you're teaching and what you're teaching. And so I think one thing that happens as children get older that I think we do very well in the early childhood classroom that tends to go away is that observation and really trying to meet the children where they are and wanting to learn the kind of learners they are, what their interests are. And we adjust, we in a lot of early childhood classrooms, in the classroom certainly that I was in, we did a semi-emergent curriculum where we had a curriculum in place, but we also had the freedom to go with interests that we saw within the classroom. Because as we all know, when you're interested in something, that drives a whole nother level of learning. You're that much more motivated. And, there's not as much pushing because it's something that is drawing the children in. And I think at an early childhood age, we do that very well because we understand it's a key component in the classroom. And so I think we allow kind of that right amount of like stepping back and giving them materials to interact with and kind of guide sort of those skills that we are wanting them to develop that will develop. Also just that enough observation to see this is how I can then tailor these materials even more to reach this particular group of learners or to bring in something that's really going to draw them in even more. And I can extend this and bring in even more with this. But I think when we start to look at, oh, but my child has to be here, or we're wanting to get into certain schools and these grades, and we push and we try to kind of force that, that's where we can overly do it. And I think where we overly are stepping right now is in the young age, in early childhood, and it's coming too soon where we're trying to put in a whole lot more structure and guidance. And as I said, give them things that they are not ready for, that are not developmentally appropriate. And then we're getting these frustrated students and learners who are not enjoying learning so much. And, but there's a balance as well, with that. There are some programs that it's a very like hands-off, free structured, and it's just play. We're just going to give you materials and you do what you want with it. There is also extremely valuable learning within that. And a lot of times in school, because we're so geared towards getting certain things and meeting certain milestones and standards, we tend to overly structure, I think, the classroom and the school day, where it's like instruction. We got to get this material. We got to get these. But then we don't step back and allow them just time to integrate the learning and the processes to really, really understand the concepts. It's not meaningful learning, and then we lose a lot of learners, and that overly structured system and one way of doing it, that standardized way, is where I think we are doing a lot of our students harm. And even within play, it's again finding that battle right now is, I think, how much do we guide it? How much do we structure it? And how much do we let it be just play? And that is, I think, very much a common and constant debate in the early childhood world right now is what's more valuable and what should we be doing more of? And I personally believe that there needs to be a balance. And just like I think that you have a classroom full of children that learn in different ways. And so the best thing is to provide a number of different ways and mediums and materials for them to engage with and interact and find the way in which they learn best and which they enjoy learning. And that is what sets them up for success. And then when we start to then really guide too much, what we're doing also is not giving them that ability to figure out how they learn, how their brain works best, how they learn best. We're telling them, this is how you have to do it. This is the way we want you to do it. And for some, it's going to be super successful and they're going to get it and they're going to thrive on it. But for others, that's where we're going to see that resistance and that like just sort of in disengagement and not wanting to care about learning because they don't feel successful. And we're saying that there's this one way to do it and that's the way you have to do it. And if you're not able to do it, then you're not a good student. You're not a good learner. And then, that impacts again, as you mentioned, then self-confidence. And then it just becomes this kind of vicious cycle and you have more and more things to battle where then it gets harder and harder to make up those gaps and try to then allow them to then figure out what it is that how they learn best. Because if you've had all this time where it's just been kind of forced onto them and they've kind of been forced into one way of doing things and it's not successful for them necessarily.
Yeah, I definitely feel like, especially with the years that are coming, I feel like we have seen a little bit of a shift. And I think with the earlier years, like you said, the lines are a little bit easier to be blurred, I think, because of their age. But when they get a little bit older and there's specific subjects like math and science and all of that, it gets a little bit more black and white. And so I think the educators are hesitant to incorporate play because it feels like they're not learning. I think because that kind of pedagogy that we've been using for so long about direct instruction and play is play and learning is learning, the fact that the idea of joining them together, especially for older kids, it seems like a lot of educators are open to it, I think, but I think maybe need this time to kind of understand like how they can both be used at the same time. And especially with the older kids, the confidence is so big because what you have is you have a child who, doesn't know how they learn and the confidence is suffering as a result. And now we have not the class clown, but the person who maybe is trying to get that engagement from their peers because they're not able to get that engagement from the whoever's educating them, which is always so sad to see, but it happens a lot.
Yes, there's a fear. It feels like there's a fear of play as children get older and in the classroom. And then, sort of this punishment as an educator, what are you doing? Like they're playing. That is not learning. And so it's important, I think, this education of what play is, and that play is the work of children. It is absolutely the work of children. And that doesn't mean just young children. I think that play is necessary all throughout school and even as adults. I have a book by David Elkin that I'm a big fan of, and he talks about the importance of play as adults as well. It's just that play, or what we think of as play, looks different. So as children get older, in terms of the learning, what is play is going to look different than it does in the early childhood classroom, but there is absolutely room for hands-on learning, project-based learning, them getting in and figuring out what they like or steering a project this way, giving them the general guidance and being truly a guide, which is what I think good early childhood teachers understand their role is a guide, not an instructor. But here I am as a guide to offer these things, to present these things, and give you options for you to discover and find out really how you learn as opposed to what to learn. And I think that's one of the biggest shifts we do in the education system is we really shift from how to learn and then what to learn. We need to cover this material, we need to cover it this way, and we need to meet these standards by this time and this time. Because granted, our whole system, there's a lot that is based upon that. So I'm a believer in a whole revamping, but that's a whole nother discussion of our education system.
Man, I would love to be part of that conversation.
Yes, absolutely. But I do think we are doing a great disservice taking away play and, cutting recess time,
Yeah.
taking away that unstructured, because there's learning that happens there. Yes, it might be different. It's still social learning, which is just as important, if not more valuable as we get older and are much more embedded in our social systems and impacted and influenced by our social peers. Then they also need that unstructured time to just be and discover and figure out. And I think that, yes, we are taking more and more of that away, even sometimes with good intentions. So there's a lot of, extracurricular activities and this, and we sign you up for this and this. And so then you have these students who, I mean, from morning until night,
Oh my
evening,
gosh.
are in something and doing something. And again, not having then that unstructured, like you time, where do we put in too much and where do we not let go enough? Think that is a big one, is that we tend to feel like it's better if we are structuring every part of their day and they're constantly engaged and they're going to. And I think that we're actually causing a lot of harm that way. And when we don't step back and allow just that natural time to then really, really imprint the learning and make it their own.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what do you think it would look like to intentionally guide a child's attention while still allowing them to lead? Like what that happy medium that we've been talking about.
So I think a key component of it is relationship building.
Yes. Yeah.
And because we are social beings and social creatures and very much social learners as well, I'm definitely a believer in the theories of Vygotsky, Albert Bandura's, and how much our social context and environment impacts us. And as well as that is a part of our learning, scaffolding, watching other and observing, is we learn so much that way. So I think that a key component is having that relationship with the child, with the student, really taking the time to get to know them, to find interests and likes and what draws them in and how they learn, as I talked about. And I think that if the beginning part of school, as in the early childhood classroom, is structured, it is the expectation that the first month or so, sure, we're introducing things and obviously the concept of being in school and all of that, but really we are very much focused on just building our relationship with with our students, and getting to know who they are and what kinds of words we use with them, because that makes a difference as well. Like we're all different. And the way you speak with one student is not necessarily going to be successful or effective with another student.
Absolutely.
And so because learning is such a social thing, and that teacher-student relationship, I think, is key. And so I think it would look like allowing the educators more time in the beginning of the year to build that relationship, to get to know, to allow students to share who they are, what their interests are, how they think thus far, whatever grade they're in, they learn best, the kinds of things they would like to learn. And that gives a kind of a guide for the teacher to be like, okay, and here are the materials that I can have, that I can bring in, that can lead us in this direction, or that can bring us here. And you can still meet those standards, I believe, and those skills in that same way. But I just don't think that we allow it. There's just like, no, this is how we've been doing it. This is how it works, even though it's not working. And so we've continued kind of in that, and we see it. We see it now that it is very much, we're not having a successful education system for the most part. A lot of children are not learning successfully or not feeling successful. And there are all kinds of things impacting that, which I understand makes it a very big beast to tackle. But I think that a key component would be starting with those relationships, because it is important, and it makes learning, I think, that much more valuable and that much more successful when a student or a child feels like they do have a relationship with the educator, and they're a lot more willing then to let them guide and not be resistant to it, because then there is more of a feeling of, I think that, oh, this person cares and they are here to help me learn. And I think a lot of times, unfortunately, I don't think students feel that way, sadly.
Yeah, it is very unfortunate, but that rapport building is so important. And I think that because, in the child mental health world, the rapport building is just essential. I mean, it's first out the gate. And I think in education world, it gets a little bit swept under the rug because of the amount of children per classroom. But I think that there's just so many other ways that you can connect to a child and get a feel for what they like and what they dislike or how they learn. And I think that it just makes such a big difference. The child can trust you when the child trusts you. Then they can tell you when they don't understand something, instead of like, I'm going to get up and run around the room. Like there's a big difference it can
Absolutely.
make when they trust the
Yes.
adult that's educating them. Yeah. So this is a great segue into our little study that we were reading about, because this is a little bit talking about the role of the adult when we are having that kind of guided play. So in free play, however, the adult's role is passive, allowing the children to do as they would without interference. Although this approach allows children maximum amount of freedom, the child's role is active, guiding them, and encouraging them to do as they would without interference. It also means that children are likely to have difficulty achieving the learning goal because they are not being encouraged to focus on the appropriate dimensions. In contrast, the adult's role in guided play is active, although not dictatorial. The adult is in guided play situation, they initiate the play context but does not direct the play within that context. Rather, the adult follows the child's lead and allows the child to engage in discovery within the context of the prepared environment. So it's kind of like that vessel, because children energy is so fluid sometimes, and having that vessel to keep them within the parameters, and that just makes so much more available for them to learn because they have that wall, that bumper.
Absolutely. It's again, as I said, I think it's a matter of a balance, kind of both, and a multitude of approaches. And I've been fortunate enough in the preschool classrooms that I've worked in that it hasn't been one particular pedagogue style of, it hasn't been just Montessori, for instance, or just a Reggio Emilia based, but it's been a mix of best practices and taking some of that unstructured time and allowing that free play, but then also having activities where you set the parameters because there's a specific concept that you need to introduce and you need to get across. And so,
Yes.
I would often do that in a group, in our morning meeting, structure that time when we're ready, that in our brain, that early learning, a particular concept. I would structure a group activity, still very much through the modality of obviously play. So for instance, I know in particular, in the article, a lot of it refers to specifically oftentimes math concepts and number skills. So for instance, I would do math stories with my kiddos. And what that was, I would print out sort of a background, the ocean background, and I had ocean animals, right? And so it was a combination of, we had, the materials and the tools that were play and, an appropriate material for them, but I was guiding them in a story. One day, our ocean friends were swimming along. There were two ocean friends who were playing together. Can you put two ocean friends into the water?
Mm,
So again, very obviously in a mode that is very playful and based where they are having fun. They get to pick up the ocean animals and choose. But I had a very specific outcome,
mm,
in terms of skills and concepts that we were trying to build and the understanding of beginning addition skills, understanding quantity. There you go within that, following verbal directions. I mean, there's so much in that is important to have those guided activities because even within one guided activity in the preschool classroom, you're getting so many things. You're getting so many things that you're building, not just cognitive skills and those specific math skills, but social emotional, the ability to listen and follow a simple direction.
mhm,
They're working in groups, small groups, so they're having to work together and take turns. So there's a lot of value that comes from that guided learning when you want those specific outcomes. But again, then you need to allow the openness and offer the materials to then let them go. Where if they want to go and you still have those concepts, you have those materials out in what we deemed in the preschool classrooms that I worked in, their work time, they would get to go and choose what they wanted to work with. So there was no instruction there of, hey, you have to specifically work with this, but this is where I'm the guide and the facilitator. And so the materials that I'm putting out, I know while they're playing, they're also gaining they are going to have, without a doubt, the opportunity to develop skills that we are trying to develop. But, if they choose like a math activity from the math shelf and interact with it in a different way, explores different, that's where that free structure and you let them go because that's hugely valuable learning there. That is when they really truly are taking charge of their learning because they're curious and they're wondering, what do I do? What will happen if I do this? Or what can I do with this? And if they're pretending it's something else, again, that's also a skill that we look to develop. So that is valuable. Can they take an object that is not the actual object and imagine that it's a phone or that it's something that they're cooking with? And that is a developmental cognitive skill that we look to that they have the ability to do. So there's value if they're engaging with the material and it's not maybe the way that you necessarily intended that material to be engaged with. It doesn't mean that they're not gaining anything from it. They are gaining just as valuable skills from that, allowing them to have that opportunity to discover and make discoveries themselves. And they're going to make scientific discoveries because we are naturally scientists. Neil deGrasse Tyson, one of my favorite astronomers, he talks about how children are these very natural scientists, right? They destroy things, they want to drop things, they want to smash things, because they want to see what will happen. And that very much is a science brain, a science way of approaching thinking. What is going to happen if I do this? What will happen if I manipulate this material? And we tend to, again, not necessarily meaning to, because also I understand within that there is safety and there are parameters that have to come in, but we can often be a little bit too structured and we take away that natural cognitive desire to be like, ooh, what happens if I do this? And allowing them on their own to take charge of making a meaningful discovery.
Absolutely. Asking a child a question, just a simple question, can yield so many results because they want to answer questions, they want to ask questions. It's so fascinating to watch a group of 4 and 5-year-olds play. They naturally get into role play, they naturally get into dynamics, they naturally just do it because they just want to learn so much. They want to learn so much. And adults, please, your children want to learn so much, especially at that age, that there's just so many opportunities for them to learn something. And play is just like it's their language. It's just such a good way to connect to them.
Yes,
For sure.
exactly. I'm glad you said that because I think that really what needs to remember is that play really is the most valuable pedagogical tool in the early childhood classroom. And well, I shouldn't say that. I should say in the classroom period, because I
Absolutely.
believe even as they get older, like I said, it looks different and
Hmm.
it made, the projects or whatever they're engaging with and in is looks different, but play doesn't lose its value in terms of being, I think, the most valuable tool to convey what we want to children and to students. And I think that also that made me think that it doesn't guided versus in free play, I don't think has to be mutually exclusive. So I'm a big fan, and I think just the value that I've gained over the years of not only studying child development and theory, but also just being in the classroom and getting to actually put it into practice is that I can be in just about any situation with a kiddo, and even if it's just free and it looks like they're just, and I can find opportunities where then I can bring in some guidance. So we could be, I'm totally going to let them take the lead, but even if it's in vocabulary and something happens, somebody's like, oh, did you see what happened there? I just noticed that when you put that in the water, it sank down, but when you put that in the water, it stayed at the top. And that can just,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have to be, then that can come just in a moment, in a natural moment. And right there, then you have a discussion about why did that one go to the bottom and that one go to the top? And then then it's, oh, they're thinking about it. Oh, this is heavy. And then your science, that's a science learning right there. Mass and matter and heavy and light. And that can be just from watching an activity that they picked up and decided to do, that you didn't necessarily have like a guided intention or outcome. When you truly are, understand that role as an early child, as an educator.
Hmm.
And when you talk about teachable moments, I think often that's what that means is that you can find it in every moment. So and that's where the value comes in. And that's where being an educator, I think that's what defines you as being an educator, is that you can take an everyday moment or any moment that somebody else looks at and be like, oh, there's no learning happening there. There's doing, and you can find where there is lots of learning to happen just in the way that you kind of maybe for a moment lead them to think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you mentioned talking about building that rapport, that is where that rapport is really, really necessary because you're able to see and understand the child and gauge without their language where they're at. So like why do some children become stressed, distracted, or less confident when the learning feels overly directed? Because teacher has to kind of understand that and see that the whatever learning style isn't necessarily connecting to the specific child, and you're starting to see them kind of get a little frustrated and not really feeling like they want to do it anymore. So why do you think they feel that way?
I think that, again, I think we have sort of a natural desire to do our own things at times and discover. And I think then a lot of times it can become then it becomes like a control
Yeah.
battle.
Yes.
And that is what then you are dealing with. And that then then it's more behavioral, because then that's where they're acting out, because it's this sense, or very much a need to feel some control. We all know that generally we all feel better when we have, just as humans, as people, when we have some control of our situations, of any of our surroundings, of our situations, of anything. There's just a little more comfort when we know that we have some level of control. And as a child, as a young child and a young person too, there is so much that is not in our control.
Mhm.
There's so much that's
Mhm.
not in our control, even just in like figuring things out and how do things work and how we use this and what's okay, what's not okay. And you're constantly being guided all the time
Mhm.
by adults who are saying, oh, this is what we do, or this is what we don't do, or we don't do this, or no, that's not what happens. So I think for, especially for young children, there is this really sense of like wanting to and needing to exert control sometimes on their own. And a lot of times if it comes to the learning, especially if it doesn't fit, if it's not a fit, then there is going to be that battle of no and resistance and not wanting to do it and not wanting to have you tell me what to do and how to do this. And so I'm just not going to. And then there's a shutdown and a resistance. And we all know that when we reach that point, then certainly there's not any learning that's happening. And again, that's where, as we talked about, then the relationship skills and that understanding really does come in, and being able to say, okay, this is not working. Let me try something else, or what else can I try? And allowing them and giving that to them then, allowing them, okay, what, we have to do this. We're going to learn this. What is a way you think you would like to try this or learn? I mean, especially with older children. And I think, like I said, we tend to kind of take that away from them and say, no, this is how we do it now. This is the method that we teach. This is this is the curriculum that our school uses, and this is what we follow. I think then, as I said, some you're going to have great success, obviously, because we do have those different learners, and some are going to thrive, need that structure, right? Some
Mhm.
of us need that. Please tell me exactly what I am doing,
Yes.
because that's when I feel safe, and that's when I feel best, and that's where I'm going to thrive.
Right.
But we are not all within that. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that we're just not all one. There's not one size fits all. There's not one model. There's not one absolute correct standard. And I think that is the biggest thing we're finding, is that we have to be malleable and flexible and allow for the fact that these are also all individuals. And yes, I know there has to be, again, sort of a general structure and guide, but I think that we can do better at allowing just more flexibility and opportunity for different kinds of learning, and for engaging students at being at the heart of their learning, and keeping child-led learning at our core all the way through schooling, not just have it be something that we talk about in early childhood and in the early childhood classroom, because again, very much it's very clear, and we see that children do very much thrive when we do allow them opportunities to sometimes lead that and have that control and have that, because it does build their confidence. It does build their ability to say, I'm a learner and I can do this.
Mhm.
Or also to make a mistake, right? To mess
Yes.
up, to not understand or not get it, and to try
Yes.
again. Resilience, which we also now are discovering, is something that a lot of students are lacking and really affects them, because when they don't do well, there's no bouncing back, or there's no, okay, well, let me try something else. It's a complete shutdown and overwhelm. And then even more so, well, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to
Mhm.
try, because I don't want to feel that way. And so again, I think it comes about down to that relationships, because that's getting to know students and really understanding. And I also do want to say, I'm not putting this all on educators, because I think educators are
Absolutely.
amazing. And I think that educators have to do so much and wear so many
Yes.
hats, and especially in our present day society, and after the effects of COVID,
Yeah.
like there's so much that teachers and educators are dealing with. And so I think obviously it is the system, it's the larger system and structure that really we need to work to change. And a big part of that is that support for teachers, and allowing them to build relationships, to have the support so that they can do that, to have the support, to have other methods to bring in, and other means or materials to teach, because you have different students. But it's hard when you have a classroom of 35 kiddos and you're the only teacher, and a variety of learning styles and a variety of things that are going on at home that impact what's happening in the classroom. And then you don't have the support system in schools to be able to bring your best self, to build relationships with each of those children, because we're exhausted and overwhelmed. But I think that is where we need to put our focus, because I think that can have the biggest impact. So,
Yes, definitely easier said than done. But I think,
yes.
like you said, just worth it if we could dedicate just some energy to really figuring out how we can incorporate it. It seems stressful now because you're already trying to educate so many kids while also shifting into a new way of teaching. But if we could make that shift, I feel like that could make the subsequent years, after so much easier for the educator who has 35 kids and no support. Oh my goodness, I cannot.
No, I know. And
I'm
it's that social emotional too, right? Which is
Yeah.
another key component I'm a big advocate of talking about is like that's a high priority focus in the early childhood classroom, right? If not far more important than the cognitive skills. Like those will come and I try to express to parents, but really if you don't have that social emotional foundation, guess what? The cognitive skills also aren't going to come. And I think sometimes we don't realize how connected those are. We're not going to build the cognitive skills if we don't have a solid social emotional foundation. Those key things like the ability to cooperate, to work in a relationship, to work back and forth, to be able to really hear one another, to be able to be resilient. Right. And know that we're going to mess up or we're not going to be good at all things. And that's okay. And that is okay.
Yes.
I'm still valuable because of it. And all of those, if we don't have that, then it is really hard, becomes that much harder to build the cognitive skills on top of it because you have
Yes.
these holes and inevitably at some point it's going to fall through and suffer just like the foundation of a house. If it's not solid, you could build on it and you can build on it and maybe it'll be successful for a little bit, but you're going to have a lot of cracks that come in and a lot of, sort of unstableness and unsteadiness if you have significant social emotional holes. And I think, post COVID, I think educators are seeing a lot of that in the classroom because that social emotional component was really impacted and affected. And they're seeing how much that is affecting learning.
Yes.
And so the learning is not really happening when there is so much social emotional that is lacking and that we're not getting. And so then we don't have success in the academic side of it as well. And so I think that is where the focus needs to be is that social emotional and that includes relationships, and those relational skills and skill building. And that's a key component of our learning.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's in like making like you said, making a mistake and problem solving and being able to look at a problem and even if you can't solve it, go to the proper person who can solve it, but also being able to understand that there's a problem even in the first place, and, like, because sometimes they'll go into fight or flight because they don't have those problem-solving skills because they've been fed, the information and not really shown how to really explicitly use it. So absolutely, it just seems like there's just so many benefits, I think, from really incorporating that play. But why do you think giving children freedom sometimes leads to play, but not always deep understanding?
Right. So again, because they are new beings discovering and learning, there is not always that meaningful or intent behind it.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes it is, yeah, I'm doing to do. And yeah, there's not necessarily intention or meaning behind it. And so, yes, there's not necessarily going to be a whole lot of maybe value or valuable learning from that. But I also am a believer that having those moments are important too.
Yes.
If you just want to stack or if you just want to knock down stuff for a little bit, okay.
Mhm.
Because there is some learning in that as well. And I think again, but it's that like allowing that them to guide it and do what they want. And there is value in that. But yes, if there's not always going to be meaning and intention behind it because they're little and they're learning and they're discovering and they don't necessarily know how to do that either yet. And so again, that's where that guided play is important as well, because in a way you're also showing them, right? And
Mhm.
they're going to then eventually take that into their play. And you do see that too in the preschool classroom, even from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, you absolutely, as an early childhood educator, see a development in play.
Mhm.
Or like what they start off doing in the beginning of the year, say maybe even for instance in the block area where they go might just be, there's not a lot to it. Maybe they just dump stuff out, and there's a lot of dumping and there's maybe
Yes.
a lot of pie and there's not a lot to it. But then you bring in things like, you change the materials and you bring in
Mhm.
different materials. So then they're exploring and trying it and they have to kind of be forced to use it in different ways. Or you bring in, with that too, their books are modeled, to try, to set up, or you might bring in blueprints if you're studying, construction, then they're looking at blueprints and following the shapes. or, even taping shapes on the floor and getting them to start to build and put the things into shapes and actually build things, then eventually by the end, you start to see more and more complex structures and they start incorporating materials and design and using more of the space. And you see how that guiding and showing them and bringing in some more intention, they then start to take it on as their own. And then they are taking what you've given them, but then they are then truly making it their own. And that's when it becomes really super valuable. That's when you've done, then you're like, yes. That's when the early childhood educator is like, yeah, I did
Exactly.
it. That's
Yes.
success. That's what it looks like. And because that is the ultimate, is now that you see them taking it and doing it on their own and, from their own desire for adding this intention and meaning. And then that they have taken it in and that they are understanding it, because then they are naturally then incorporating it and understand how to do it. And that's the magic. That's the success.
Yeah, it's always such a good feeling to see them connect to what you're trying to get through to them. And, that deep understanding, like you said, it's not necessary all the time. Some sort of meaning obviously is always very important, but deep understanding sometimes obviously is very, very important. But in that free play, letting them just kind of explore. There may not be deep understanding, but there's understanding. So anytime you can get some understanding is great.
Absolutely. Same for adults, right? When we play our play, it's not, not necessarily that we're always getting deep understanding from it, but it brings us joy. It's what we want, and that we know and recognize is very valuable.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so, why might learning feel frustrating when children aren't helped to focus on what truly matters?
I think it's like anything as a child, like they're looking for guidance, right? They're coming in with nothing. I mean, with very little information, right? They are just they're here to absorb and observe, and they absorb everything. So children are constantly looking for really, and they need that guidance. And even children who are going to be your pushers, maybe you tell them something, oh, we don't do that, and then they do it, that they're still looking for guidance, because then they're going to say, oh, well, what will happen if I do? You're telling me not to do it. So, okay, but I'm going to do it and see what happens. And that is them saying, okay, I'm going to see like how far are you going? How far are you going to let me go? Where is the structure? Where is the guidance? Because it can feel overwhelming, very overwhelming, right? When we don't have a structure or a way to rein in everything that's like everything is new, and even emotions, right? At a young age, dysregulation we see in young children, because even that they're feeling it, but they don't know, they don't understand what it is. And so we help to give words and name feelings. We help
Yes.
to provide space and opportunity and tools to deal with the feelings in a way that is not going to harm them or others. And they need that, because we don't know that. We come in
Hmm.
not knowing. And so if it's just completely left up to the child and they're not giving that structure, we also know that that's very harmful and detrimental, because when we don't know, it's not like we're going to make the best choices necessarily, right? Because we don't know.
Hmm.
Nobody has told us. Nobody has given us any guidance as to, no, we usually shouldn't do that because that can harm us, can harm ourselves, or whatever it is. We have no guidance, so we're not going to necessarily make the good choices. And it's very frightening and overwhelming when there is nothing in
Hmm.
place. And some of us, again, it's that range of like, some of us like a lot more structure and some of us
Hmm.
don't do so well. Maybe we need a lot less structure, but
Hmm.
I think there is a need for structure and for some guidance, because we are blank slates when we come in and we don't know. And so we also are doing harm, obviously, if we're not giving some parameters or guidance. And especially also within, even being social beings, we're bringing up these little people to then exist in groups with others and to live together. And if we're not providing guidance or some, parameters of how we do this, what is okay and how we can, work best together, then it tends to be detrimental and harmful. And we see that as well. We see those impacts as well. So again, I'm also a big believer inside of sort of that moderation and finding that balance. I think that, again, there's not just one way, or even from moment to moment, from context to context, right? As teachers within a classroom and as parents as well, you kind of make those judgments also depending on the situation, depending on who's around, what's around, whether you have more time to do it, whether it is safer,
Yes.
whether, I mean, there are all kinds of things that impact our decisions. And those, if we don't get guidance on what kinds of things we should be looking at or paying attention to, or that are important for us to help us make these decisions, then that can be very harmful.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that attaching that meaning, I think that every educator has been asked the question, like, why do we have to learn this? Why do we have to learn this? And I think the more that you kind of have that more play-based, role-playing base, especially with the older kids, it can really attach that meaning because it goes from we're not doing fractions and learning how to navigate fractions. Maybe we're looking at it in the context of baking something. We're role playing baking something. We're role playing buying something with decimals. There's just that's that real life experience. Then there's just in so many other ways that we can. Science is great because science is just it's very. I mean, they got it. You know what I mean? It's very meaningful and it's very concrete. Subjects are a little bit harder, and I think that the more that you can kind of weave in that role play, you can totally have that meaning. They can totally understand that meaning, and they'll still ask, of course, but
Of course. But if you can give them, how it relates, then
yes.
certainly like it helps, and even in the early childhood classroom, like for instance, when we begin introducing letters and whatnot, the first letter that we focus on is their first
Yep.
letter, the letter
Yep.
of their name. Why? Because that means a lot to them. It's their name. It's important. And that, of course they want to learn it because it's theirs and it means something to them. So again, I think, in the early childhood classroom, we do have that focus. We bring in what's relevant, what is meaningful to them, what they can relate to that's in their world that they want to. We don't start with the whole alphabet. It's their first letter. It's the letters in their names, and when I was working with 3-year-olds too, I would always tell parents, we obviously are going to introduce them. They're going to see letters, but by the end of the year, my goal is they can recognize their name. That's what it should be at this age because that is the most relevant to them. So that is something that is going to mean something to them and that is going to stick. And that's where we start. So if you can bring and show meaning, which I think you absolutely can with older kids, it should do things like a mock business, create this,
Absolutely.
right? Where you have to then design flyers because then you're bringing in all other components, some art. You have those students that are artistic and creative and they want to do, okay, I'll design the flyers. Ooh, I'm the numbers person. And you honor that's the other thing that we really work to, right? You honor the differences that are between us and that's
Yes.
valuable, right? So,
Yes.
I know right now, DEI and diversity is a bad word and which is
Very,
insane
very.
to me. But, it doesn't, that is diversity. Just honoring too that we're different, we have different strengths but that
Absolutely.
we all have value though, because all of these different strengths bring value and play components in these things. And I think that again, that's social emotional. That's how you build in that unity and that, hey, that our differences are what make us valuable, right? And that none of us are the same,
Absolutely.
that like across the board, none of us are the same in our learning style and what we like to do in all of that and our abilities, none of us are the same. And that's what's valuable. And so when you can have more of that play and bring in and allow those students to bring in who they are, and that's making their meaning their own and do what they do best and feel successful at, then you have much more successful outcomes and successful learners and students that are engaged in it because it's meaningful and it's something that they get to take and make theirs and pull on their strengths. And then when they know what their challenges are and then know how to call on others to fill in and know that we need those because we are not all good at everything.
Yes. Absolutely. I think the sooner a child can really understand their strengths and their kind of personality type, and there's, no way to know for sure, but there's, there are things that are kind of there that are their strengths or their natural kind of temperament and how that can be used kind of create, because if they can understand their strengths, they can kind of navigate the perceived weaknesses so much better if they understand where the strengths are. Nobody, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and then that made me think, and then that's where you step back, right? And then
Yes.
they learn a tremendous amount and even not, if not more so from one another, right? They're more likely to then maybe be receptive and maybe something they weren't hearing from you as an educator or for whatever reason wasn't clicking. All of a sudden, a fellow student, they see it and they go, oh my God, okay. And then they're learning from one another, which
Yeah.
is also extremely valuable. And also as an educator, you're like, yes, yes, this is what we should be doing, is facilitating, not instructing directly all the time, but facilitating and guiding and allowing and creating opportunities for the learning to happen.
Yes, we are creating the adults of tomorrow, and so we're future educators, future lawyers, future doctors, future dancers, future singers are all in our classroom, and they have that kind of interest already. And
Yes.
identifying it and nurturing is just so important. And in and out of the classroom, there's always opportunities for it. So, what do you think it actually looks like when the learning? And we've talked about this, I think, but what do you think that the learning actually looks like when it is both structured and playful? Like an example.
So I would say that oh gosh, again, I hate to keep it. I mean, obviously it's my wheelhouse and it's what I know, but if you go into an early childhood classroom,
Yeah.
a good early childhood classroom with a successful, where the educator truly understands the role of facilitating, you see it in action all day long, right? Because all throughout the day, as I mentioned, you structure the day with specific opportunities of like actual guided lessons where you are looking for a specific outcome or for a specific skill to be introduced. And again, not to, and that's the key, necessarily to be mastered, but to be introduced, right? And exposed to and practiced. And then it gets repeated over and over and over and in different ways. So then you have the guided activity, but then again, that transitions to let me just provide the materials that
Hmm.
allows them to explore, but is still going to have them building these skills, that we are aiming to build. So you have the group instruction where you see like it was certain morning time activity, like I said, for the example that I gave, where it's very much directed by the teacher. This is what we're doing, right? Or we're going on a shape hunt. That is a very guided activity. You are specifically wanting to build the skill of being able to identify and name shapes and be able to find it, follow simple. You bring literacy skills in it because you give them illustrations of your finding a blue square. So those, you see those activities, but then you have what should be, the classroom, they call it different things, but work time or free or exploration time, where it is just, okay, then it's just about you are the one that provides the materials and allows that and sets it up and the environment. And that's where the classroom environment comes in and is key. And a good early childhood educator understands how to set it up where you are inviting them. There are provocations, there are challenges that they want to go to. It's inviting, but you are not directly saying, hey, this is where you're going. This is where you're going. And so there is that sense of it's open and they get to decide. And if they choose a material, and again, as I said, are using it in a different way, that's okay, because the value is still coming in the material and what you're giving them. And there's learning coming through that. And so I think that's what it looks like, should look like in a classroom as well, where you have moments where the teacher is certainly giving the structure and the guidance, but then it's step back. And then you should go into a classroom and really see the children engaged with one and the students engaged with one another. And I think like hands-on and moving around and touching things and maneuvering
Hmm.
things and building things and leading discussions with really the teacher there very much sort of in the background
Hmm.
and facilitating and stepping in where they see, okay, wait, how about if we take this way? I hear this is happening and, guide it
Yes.
this way and
Yeah.
take it that way. But I think that's what a successful classroom looks like, is student engagement. Like they are talking, they are maneuvering, they are doing, they are just engaged rather than just sitting and listening.
Yes, absolutely. I think that especially from my specific background, it's when they ask questions and they are motivated to get the answer right, even if it's not something that's they're necessarily strong at, but you've structured it in a way where you spiked the curiosity that's always there, regardless of subject. It's there.
Yes.
Any way you could kind of get them asking questions, get them curious about wanting the right answer, even if they don't know how to get the right answer, they still want to know what it is. That's amazing. That's an amazing step that we can take. And always a good sign, and always something we can work with that. We can work with that.
Absolutely. That's that, where you apply to that semi-emergent curriculum. If you have a student, if
Yes.
you've sparked something and they're like, hey, and then it leads to a question and maybe it's not necessarily within your plans, but
Yep.
you recognize that, oh my God, what you've sparked and like, okay, I know where this is valuable. And you are allowed, again, the structure and system in place allows the educator to do that and have the
Yes.
support to do that. Then
Absolutely.
that lesson is going to stick so much more. That learning is going to be much more valuable because they led that. You sparked it, but then they took it. And that is what an educator should be doing, right? I'm going to give you the spark. I'm hoping to ignite it. And by finding different interests, by finding different ways, by finding things that are meaningful and relevant to you, I want to spark something, but then to see it ignited and then go with it and take the learning as their own ultimately is the goal, should be the goal of an educator.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it produces that kind of that brain muscle memory throughout the years of like, I don't know, brain muscle memory. I don't know if it's a real thing, but just kind of that thought process of inquiry and being curious can really, I think, be valuable if it's carried throughout the years. I think these early childhood years, getting them comfortable with asking questions or getting them inspired to be curious, I think is just so meaningful.
Absolutely. I used to do a wonder wall in the classroom with preschoolers. And, and it's a process like the whole, the before leading up to it, there was a process of learning what a question is. Right? Because they don't know, what a question is versus a statement. All the time, the early childhood teacher, you can joke with them and say, you ask anybody have any questions, and you'll get, my daddy went to the store yesterday and he bought me some ice cream, right? And
Yep.
so, it begins, I mean, even in kindergarten and I think even first grade or lower elementary,
Oh,
you
yeah.
have that
Oh, yeah.
as well. And so, they're learning right there, like, start with, what is a question? Oh, a question is when we want to know more something, right?
Hmm.
And then, and so then getting to that point where then they can ask a question. So if we were learning about space, we'd start with a wonder wall. What is something you want to know about space?
Yes.
And asking the question and then modeling and showing and teaching, okay, when we have a question, where can we find that answer? Well, we can ask people who might know, but if they don't know, books books are a good place to learn. And then finding a book and you get a reference book or a book about it, for school, and then you show them and then we find the answer for that and then we write it down and you are showing again, you're teaching them that process, that how to learn, not what to learn, but how.
Exactly.
If you're curious and you have a question, start with the question.
Yep.
And then here is how we can maybe then go about finding the answer to this question. And that is how we learn and how we think. And that is what we should be teaching.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, this question is, what is guided play and how is it different from simply teaching or stepping back? So, I think that like when we talk about guided play and giving that explicit example, I think educators maybe need that too. What is it like, for example, like a specific lesson? What does it look like to have that lesson in a guided play lens versus a like teaching it lens? And maybe educators like having that explicit also kind of example could help them kind of attach that meaning to their own kind of pedagogy, what they use in their own schools.
Right. So I think guided play again through that is providing the intention, right? So you are guiding sort of the direction ultimately that you would like it to go in versus free play. You're not giving any direction. You are leaving it open-ended. Whatever direction it goes in, it goes in.
Right.
And that's just leaving it free, unstructured. And, and as I said, there's value in that too, because they're going to make their own discoveries and whatnot. But it's just allowing it to be, right? And just allowing, not having to bring an intention to it. And I think that is important as well. And I think that we can sometimes overly focus, when we know that guided play, sometimes even early childhood, then we like feel a need for like every play interaction, bring in
Yes.
some guidance, bring in some learning. And that doesn't need to happen because sometimes you just need to be quiet,
Yeah.
honestly. And I think that sometimes can be hard for educators because there's this
Yeah.
feeling, there's this need of, I'm here to teach. So I better find whatever opportunity or lesson I can in this because that's what I'm supposed to do. But no, sometimes really that's where we observe who the child is, right? And maybe how their brain works. We watch what they do with the toy, with the material. We watch what they decide to play. We listen to what the conversation, if they're like maneuvering, what conversation they're having or what it
Right.
is they decide to build. Like that is, I think, a great opportunity for us to just observe and get to know the child. And so is valuable in its own way. And whereas guided play, you are choosing the materials, you have a structure to it, for it to follow, we're going to do this first, and then we're going to do this, and then we'll wrap it up this way. So it
Mhm.
is sort of a lesson plan. There is more of a structure to it.
Yeah.
And you have a specific skill generally that you are trying to convey in this particular lesson. So, for instance, with the
Mhm.
math stories, it was specifically quantity I was dealing with and understanding beginning addition skills. If we have two fish friends and then another fish friend comes along and joins the two friends, those are beginning addition skills that at the, 4-year-old, 3.5, 4-year-old level, we are looking to start to build that understanding. Oh, I have one more. My group is going to get bigger. When I start to take away, which was like, on the tail end when the story came around, then friends would leave and have to go. When I take
Yes.
away, my group is going to get smaller. So that was a specific concept I'm trying to teach, is this understanding of when we add or put together, the group gets bigger. When we take away, it gets smaller. So I have a specific skill and concept that I am wanting to convey. So then I think about what materials I can use and a developmentally appropriate way, which in the early childhood classroom is going to be a play-based way. It's going to be using manipulatives. It's going to be using dinosaurs. It's going to be using whatever it is. And it's going to be active. I am in the early childhood classroom really good. Children, we only have so much attention, right? And focus, and that builds too. And that's part of what we do and
Yeah.
what we in the early childhood work to kind of build that. But they have to be engaged and they have to move and they have to be a part of it for them to stay
Yes.
engaged and wanting to do it. So they get to be involved, they get to manipulate the materials, but I've said what the materials are. I've structured what it is that we are, the concept is that we are trying to build. I'm versus, hey, I'm just going to put out ocean animals. Here you go,
Yeah.
which would be unstructured
Absolutely.
play. So that is the difference between guided play. Direct instruction, I think, is less. There's less. It's really, at least the way I interpret and think of it is, I am just telling, here's what we do. But even with that, they're not necessarily engaging. They are sitting and listening. I'm giving you a lecture. This is here. We're doing a lesson on multiplication, and you're sitting here and you're watching me,
Yeah.
do this.
Yeah.
And I think we should have less and less of that. And I'm not
Yes.
saying that there's not opportunity for that or moment, but I think each lesson can actually involve a bit of everything, right?
Yes.
So I think certainly I start with guided instruction or direct instruction when I say, okay, we're going to sit down in the classroom. I need you to sit down and, Miss Kilgore is going to bring you 5 animals and you're going to leave the animals in front of you. Here's when we're going to take this animal and we're going to put, when I tell you, you're going to put it on so I'm giving them the direction. So I'm giving
Right.
them, that is a direct instruction there. And there's value in that in the early childhood classroom too, because that's a skill that we're also looking that they can follow. Can they hear a direction and follow it? And we go from simple step directions to multi-step directions and more complex
Mhm.
directions. So it's a skill to be gained as well, right? So that's
Mhm.
a part of it. But then I also am making sure that the tool and the means that I'm using it is developmentally appropriate, whatever age student that is,
Yeah.
guiding it to be something that is going to engage them, that is appropriate for them, but then allowing them to be a part of it and interactive with it, I think is key, because I think for any being, hands-on experience just adds another level to it. And you're also getting all those different learners, right? So some
Yeah.
of us do really well with auditory instruction. You just need to tell me what to do and I got it.
Right.
Others of us know, also let me do it, right? I need to
Yes.
do it or I need to see it. So I'm going to show an example. I'm going to give a visual example as well.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you're going to have the opportunity to do it. Right.
Yes.
And that all can be within one lesson. And then I think, though, where you also then make it whole is then you give opportunity for the really more unstructured play,
Right.
but with the materials and in a way, now you've set up, you've given them the guidance.
Mhm.
And then you're likely to go see them play on their own and take the materials and take the animals. And I have 2 friends. And now I'm going to
Yeah.
bring one more. And now I have 3. And they're like,
Absolutely.
oh my God. You're like, oh my God, they're doing it, but on their own. But because now you're giving them the opportunity to then just do it without you saying, hey, this is what we're doing now. But you're providing the opportunity still and the materials that are going to allow opportunities for them to then do that on their own. And that, I think, makes it sort of whole and complete. if that makes sense. And so I think that there is space for all of it because also you are trying to reach a variety of different learners and
Mhm.
brains. And as is mentioned in the article, and as we've talked about, we all don't learn in one way. And
Right.
so it should be a combination of ways of teaching so that you are allowing all those different learners to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's multi-sensory, it's multi-tiered. I think multi-tiered, that sort of structure of having that tier 1, everybody gets it, and, like, understanding what that really means, and, like, providing that multi-sensory support is also multi-tiered because those tier 1 kids, maybe they are all visual learners or they're all auditory learners, and then you've got those tier 2 kids that I'm like, "Well, I kinda need a visual." You know what I mean? But you've got that tier 1 already, and if you're gonna do those multi-sensory kind of, methods, and you've got those tiers and you can reach so many more students and really create that meaning for different populations of kids that you have, because you have a lot of different children's that learn in completely different ways. But I feel like you've already answered this question about how does that gentle support really mean in practice, like providing those materials and then also being there watching and providing that kind of gentle guidance and making sure that they're staying on task and providing the materials, but essentially letting them kind of explore on their own. Is there anything else you want to add about that?
No, I think it just is, you're right, like being able to kind of understand and having, I mean, the knowledge, obviously an understanding of child development and theory and learning theories obviously is very valuable. And that's where that educator role and learning and obviously schooling is very, very important because not everybody can do it. Not everybody can successfully teach. It
Hmm.
is absolutely a skill, but I think, yeah, even when you need to teach like a specific way of doing a math problem, our lessons, I think if we are allowed to have different ways to know that there is someone who's going to understand if I explain it this way, but then
Hmm.
I have James over here who I know is much more visual and he's going to need
Yeah.
some manipulatives to break this down. So in groups, so how can I help him see it in groups that he can use, the manipulatives in this way and get to the same solution, but in
Yeah.
a way that he understands and works for him. I think that that really is a valuable educator and that it takes being able to be present. It takes
Hmm.
being able to be very intentional and I
Yeah.
think that that is key. And that a lot of times that educators don't have the ability to be because there are so many other things and it's just about getting it done. It's meeting deadlines. It's meeting these standards. Oh, you have this. It's your principal, your review or whatever it is that takes away, I think, a lot from being able to be intentional with your teaching. And I think that's where you really get valuable teaching is when you can be intentional with it and really put thought into how can I present this lesson in a way that I know I'm reaching a
Yes.
variety of my students and is multifaceted and allows for all those components we talked about that
Hmm.
really truly helps to make for successful learning. And so I think really that again, it comes down to being allowed that space for relation building and to be able to observe your students and get to know them and have the time and
Yes.
resources and
Yes.
support to put
Absolutely.
intention into your lessons.
Absolutely, absolutely. Every school is different, and there are some schools I was very fortunate to work for a school that is very we were in career-based school, so our job is to really look at what can be done differently, what can be done what's
Amazing.
new. But even then, there's still so many things that come into play with our educators there that it still can be difficult to really make that connection with every student. So, yeah, I think it's easier said than done. It takes time, it takes patience, and it definitely takes having given the parameters in order to be free enough to do that, which a lot of educators do not have. Hopefully we get to that.
Absolutely.
Hopefully we get there.
100%. 100%. Again, I think it takes a shift
Yes.
societally
Yes.
as to what's important, right? And where our priorities are. And like we should value educators like they are doctors and lawyers
Yeah.
and those that like this is a highly important job and highly skilled. If to be a successful educator takes a lot of skill, takes a lot of patience, takes a lot to be able to take something and make it meaningful and make it understandable and digestible by a variety of brains and different personalities and learning styles. It is not easy. It is not easy. And I think my biggest soapbox is that how much we undervalue educators
Yes.
and education and that it's so important and it does take time and energy and thought and intention in order to make it successful and meaningful. And it's also a dynamic field that is always changing and impacted by society and
Yes,
current context
absolutely.
and now social media and
Yeah.
technology and all of the things that have completely changed education and also how children learn. Technology and social media and our devices are certainly impacting our brains and brain development and the way children also are learning. And so that's a whole nother thing that we also are having to think about and consider and deal with and discover the impacts of. And so it's vastly important and it's not easy and it's hard. But I think the biggest thing just needs to come in like our priorities shift,
Hmm.
understanding how valuable and important it is. Because as you said, these are this people that are going to take care of us. These are our doctors, our lawyers, our scientists, our engineers, our problem solvers. There's a whole lot
Yeah.
of problems they're going to have to solve.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yes.
and and yet we're not necessarily giving them the tools to be able to do that in the best way that is going to serve them. Yeah, I think we're trying. I think we're trying. And I
Hmm.
think those who are in the field
Absolutely.
understand and see it. And that's why these conversations are happening
Yeah.
and why they are important. But I think it also needs to go beyond the educators, because I think the educators understand it and they know it and they get it. And those that really obviously care and this means a lot to us.
Hmm.
And we want to be successful in our teaching. I think that's the ultimate thing for teachers, right? You
Yeah.
want to see success in the students, and it's very hard. It's hard on your heart, I think, as a
Yes.
teacher when that doesn't happen
Yes.
and when you're not successful. So I wish, it is my hope and wish that these conversations keep happening and that they go beyond and they go to a broader level and a policy level where we can really
Hmm.
start to make meaningful shifts and changes within the classroom and the way that we teach.
Yeah. And I think getting parents involved in these conversations is essential as well. Is really going to be important to get them involved. So
Absolutely, right.
where does this kind of learning happen most naturally? Now, getting into the parents in their role at home or during everyday playful moments, where do you think is the most valuable?
I think it starts at home. It starts
Yeah.
at home. That's number one. That is our home base, literally. And that is where it all begins. So, and before they enter into school, right? It's a good chunk
Hmm.
of time at home. Now, I mean, children
Yes.
do start going into daycares and early childhood centers, fairly young, especially these days in our society. And I think that's something that's a reason why these conversations have started to happen, because I think you do have younger and younger children who are having, because you have two working parents
Yes.
and caregivers, they have to be in school or in daycare settings or childcare settings, from a young age. And so I think that's why these conversations are happening, because we're seeing that. And again, the educators understand the value and importance of it. But it begins at home. And really, if there's no reinforcement at home, the learning is not likely to stick, right? Then we're starting all over every
Yes.
day.
Every single day.
And yes, every single day. And then you're not learning. You're not, because when you're having to start all over every single day, then nothing is staying and you're not building upon it. You're just every day having to start again. I think that is definitely, unfortunately, something that happens a lot, because there are all kinds of things that happen at home, and there are all kinds of things that are not within our control as
Hmm.
educators or even administrators in the school that are not in our control. But that's why I think home really is where it starts, because
Yeah.
that ultimately is really where it comes from.
Yes.
So the more that parents are educated and understand, and I think a key thing to understand too is that it doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be complicated or complex. It doesn't take a whole lot of materials. You don't
Nope.
have to buy toys. That there are all kinds of things you can do just with at home, with what you already have at home, that are super, super, super valuable opportunities for your child to begin building skills. It's in I was fortunate enough to be a guest on another podcast, WillowKids, that talked about the importance of early relationship skills
Yeah.
and early relational skills and how that is vital. And those beginning relationship skills with the parent and the caregiver, that's number one, right?
Yeah.
Those interactions, talking to them, they are hearing vocabulary, they are seeing, your face, your expressions, like everything is learning. So every moment, the way you talk to them, if you're speaking to them, they're going to gain more vocabulary, even if they're not
Yeah.
understanding it, but they're hearing you use words
Yeah.
and you're speaking to them. You're doing story times. You're pointing out when you go grocery shopping. That's what I tell parents all the
Yes.
time. It doesn't have
Take
to
them.
be anything extra. If you're going to the grocery store, you can go on a letter hunt. You can, on a box of cereal, they're looking at, ooh, I spy letter L. See letter L. It can be that simple. Going on a color hunt, taking them on a walk. But though you are building skills in all of those moments. And so I think it is those key everyday moments that are really vital, that if they are getting that, it's going to reinforce what's being done at school. And
Mhm.
then again, you have this whole encompassing system that when you're going to be a lot more successful. And when those are aligned, and that's why the conversations and relationships between parents and educators and schools
Mhm.
is also extremely valuable. If you can be on the same page and they understand and you have the same goals and are aligned, it is going to make the educator's job that much easier. And we are just going to be much more successful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think parents, because, parents were the children of yesteryear. So they were raised by, those teachers that were very direct instruction. I think they probably have that association with education now. And I think that I think parents are probably wary of incorporating education into their everyday life because they probably have that kind of negative connotation with school. But, if we can get school more play-based and get parents more curious about what they're learning, like it can really come together so easily. Because like you said, it does start at home. And I think that if you could get them just talking and asking questions about anything, you could give them an iPad. You
Absolutely.
could give them
Right.
an iPad. But
But
if you can get a little
here,
creative.
yeah,
Yeah.
here are some other very simple
Yes.
options. Yes, and I think you're right. Opportunities like this, conversations, discussions, where we can educate parents as well, because
Mhm.
that's what it takes. It does take educating parents, because you're right. We were even, I was educated, in different way
Yeah.
from what it is now.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of change that has happened. And so education is it's a dynamic field, and it is constantly changing and needing to be readjusted according to all kinds of things. And so people do need to be educated on it. And so I think it is a key component to educate parents on these things, and really how learning happens and how they can facilitate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving into this is a great segue. Moving on to the kind of shift that we're trying to move to get into. How can we move beyond the false choice between strict teaching and total freedom?
I
Like that kind of.
think Yeah, I think, again, as I've mentioned, and not to sound repetitive, but
Yeah.
it's finding that balance.
Yep.
It's knowing that they have value. They both have value. So I don't think it is a matter, again, of choosing one over the other, but rather creating a whole encompassing system that hits all the different components and the different ways that we can learn and the different ways that learning happen, because we don't just learn in one way. There are so many different ways that we can learn. And so I think it needs to be a combination. I think that ultimately, anytime you go with strictly one way, it can be detrimental, right? Because then there's a lot you're leaving out. If you're saying, oh, no, it's only can be done this
Yes.
one way, it has to be one or the other, then there's a whole lot that you're not getting. And that really limits how much you can teach and the way in which you can teach. And so I think it really is, as I said, again, that relationship and understanding your student and the learner,
Yeah.
but providing a combination of modalities, material, ways, styles for them to learn. And I don't think that there is one way or the other. And I think, again, like, as I said, context as well. There might
Yeah.
be a particular concept where you're like, nope, you know what? Direct instruction is the best way for me to get this particular concept across.
Absolutely.
And so I don't think that there's no place for it. And just like I don't think it's beneficial to be entirely hands off, because, as I said, they're looking as learners, as anything. You need some structure, you need something to follow. And
Mhm.
so I think it's a matter of being educated about all and knowing the different ways and understanding that child development and learning and how it happens, and being able to draw on all of these different tools.
Mhm.
You as an educator know, right? The more you have in your toolbox, better
Yes.
you are, because you have, from moment to moment, from student to student, you've got to be able to maybe try something different. You might have something in mind or planned, and then that student is going to, or multiple students are going to let you know that that was not successful and it fell flat, and you got to be on your toes and say, okay, what can I try next?
Pivot.
So I don't think that you can say that it's got to be one or the other. And I think it's really about, as you said, being present and aware and understanding and being able to present multiple opportunities and ways for learning that is going to be the most beneficial. And it's that balance and being able to apply it when it's appropriate.
Absolutely. I only have a couple more questions for you because I know we're running low on time because I could talk about this for hours.
Yes, I do. Me too, obviously.
But how can adults guide a child's attention to meaningful ideas without taking over the whole learning experience? Just briefly.
So I think you present it. It's
Yeah.
an offer. You think of it as an offer, but there is no expectation that it has to be done.
Yes.
When I set out, right now I'm working with with a toddler, and I put out activities. I give him always a variety. I think that's key. And I think that's one of the key things about the classroom, the early childhood classroom, that allows that choice within structure. So I'm choosing the
Yes.
materials and I'm putting them out, and I'm putting them out in a way that's going to entice him. But then he gets to choose what he wants to work with. And when he first goes to do it, I might show him, we're the blue balls, we're putting the blue balls in the blue box, right? And they'll show him all to do that. And he might do one or two, but then he might take all the balls and put them in, and he wants to all put them in the container, or then he wants to dump them out on the floor. And I go, okay, right? So I let him do that one or two. He mashed. I was like, you mashed the blue. And then if it's done and it goes on and he's on to the next thing, he dumps it out, then that's it too. That's okay. Look together and they're all mixed up. And, keep presenting it, and they will eventually, once they again build that understanding and then feel like it's on their own that they can do it, you will see it happen. So I think that's the best way to think about it is you can offer it. It's an offer. It's an invitation. But if they don't want to do it, that is okay.
Totally.
And I think that's the key thing. And it makes me think of, I don't know anybody, I'm a big yoga person as well, and yoga fan also with children. Yoga instructors will say, I'm here to be your guide, right? I'm not here I'm offering you these, but you don't have to take it. It's what feels good. It's what you feel like doing. It's what works. And now, while we can't entirely do that with children, I understand, because again, then you can have total chaos, and that's also not good. So, but again, it's that understanding and it's that balance. It's having both. But yeah, I think you think of it as an offer, and you can show them and you model. And I think that's is key, is just modeling, because even if they're not doing it, but you're modeling, they're learning, they're observing, and they're soaking in everything, so that the next time you do it, they might go and then they might do the whole activity and do exactly. And you're like, yes, but you haven't pushed them, you haven't forced it, and you haven't turned them off of it. And that is key.
I love that you kind of phrase it as an invitation and offer, because it does kind of give them that control back to accept or decline the offer. Of course, you want them to accept, but how can small intentional moments, those small intentional offers of playful support, build that long-lasting confidence? We've talked about this a lot, but just like briefly, like what do you think really adds to that confidence that they can take with them?
It's exposure. And the more they do it, and like I said, you're modeling, and then eventually they're going to do it and they take it on and they feel so proud when they do accomplish and they do something, and you're like, oh my gosh, you matched all the blue. The sense of pride is huge. And right there, you're boosting their confidence and their ability to do it. So by providing them the invitation, but not forcing them, you really are allowing them to take it and make it their own. And that's what gives really that sense of pride. I did it. I did, right? Not you. You didn't guide it. You didn't finish it. You didn't structure. I did it. But you've provided that modeling. You've provided that opportunity, and you've provided that guidance. And so you just keep doing it. And in the early childhood world, I also like to tell parents too, repetition is not laziness. It is how we learn. It's literally how we learn. So it's key. It's important. And we do the same things in the classroom, exposed to the same things in a variety of different ways, but over and over and over, because that is literally how we learn. And so I think that's what parents need to do as well. You provide it, you offer it, and more they might take it and go further and further, but it is really an invitation.
Yes, I love that. I love the idea of it being an invitation. So we're almost to the end of our podcast, but I did want to just really quickly show just kind of the results or the kind of findings that they in the study that we talked about. Furthermore, some evidence suggests that children participating in curricula that are based on the principles of direct instruction show more inattention and stress behaviors, less confidence in their own abilities, less enjoyment of challenging tasks, and less end-of-year progress in motor, language, and social skills when compared to playful learning classrooms. Children learn best in active, engaged, and constructive, interactive environments when the material that they are learning is meaningful to them and when they receive consequential feedback and probing questions. By putting their interests and their needs at the forefront of the learning process, by giving them feedback and direction towards the relevant dimensions, and by allowing children to be active partners, a guided play is able to keep children engaged. Yeah, there's just so much that they talk about in that whole entire article, in that whole entire study that is just gold. Any educator, any parent could really incorporate in their everyday life. And I think parents taking on that role of an educator as well and understanding that that's what they are when they're raising a child is just really, I think being able to call yourself that as a parent is a really big step that I think that we could totally make. So thank you so much for joining us. And thank you so much for talking to me about a guided play. Thank you so much for spending this time with us on the WillowKids podcast. If today's conversation sparked a new idea, gave you reassurance, or simply made you pause and reflect, we'd love for you to carry that into your week and into your lives of the children that you support. You can learn more about WillowKids, upcoming programs, and our growing community by visiting us online. And if you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing or sharing it with someone who cares deeply about education and childhood growth. Until next time, keep nurturing curiosity and keep asking thoughtful questions. And remember, strong roots grow lifelong learners. And thank you so much, Danyel, for joining us today. We really, really enjoyed having you. So please see you next time.
Thank you very much. My pleasure. I really enjoyed the conversation, Kayla, and thank you again, Willow Kids. I really find these opportunities immensely valuable and sharing this information and these thoughts. So thank you. I enjoyed it greatly.
Thank you.